I worked as a park ranger in northern Alaska for years, from when I was in my early 20s until my mid-30s. At first, when I took the job, I was trying to escape, but over time, I learned to love it. The endless wilderness, the snow-capped mountains, the muffled way everything sounded during blizzards. With no light pollution, the stars up there looked like tiny chips of diamond. And during the winter, the northern lights roll in, twisting and shimmering in strange alien colors. But a few years ago, things got much worse. People up here have started to go missing at an alarming rate, and I started having strange experiences around the park and the nature preserve. One of the strangest parts of my story started on a freezing dark night in 2018. I was on a snowmobile out in a terrible blizzard. The conditions were nearly to the point of being impassable. The snow was falling so thick and fast that it looked like a moving, shimmering wall of white on all sides of me. Another ranger, a huge, lumbering man named Ace Acosta, pulled up behind me on a second snowmobile. I looked at him, standing 6'6" with majestic peaks stretching up into the night sky, and thought about what a great picture this would make. As I was looking around, I saw the faint tracks in the snow. Ace's snowmobile lights were pointed in their direction, and I had been standing almost on top of them without realizing it, which is fairly easy to do when a few inches of snow are falling every hour. At first, I thought it was the frozen tracks of an injured animal. I saw the drops of blood soaked into the superficial ice first. Following their direction with my eyes, I realized there were footprints pressed into the frozen crust leading away from me and towards the flat stretch of the tundra. I squinted, getting down on my knees and leaning inwards. I didn't want to trample the tracks. I quickly realized I was looking at human footprints, naked human footprints. But who would be out here in December in negative 40-degree winds without shoes? They would die rapidly out here. Just for me to drive across the tundra on a snowmobile required me to wear 3 jackets, long johns, snow pants, thick jeans, a ski mask, and multiple layers of socks and gloves with hand warmers. I wore special waterproof boots with composite toes that wouldn't freeze like steel toes. And despite all of this, I was still cold. I moved forward and saw handprints mixed in with the footprints, all of them bloody. The ice was thick enough to slice open human hands and feet, undoubtedly. The logical conclusion was unshakable. Someone had crawled through here, maybe naked, on all fours, and their frozen body would be somewhere up ahead. I sighed, turning to Acosta. He still stood in the same position, his face covered in a red scarf with only his eyes showing. I saw one ice-covered eyebrow raise questioningly. "I think we got us a body somewhere nearby," I said, getting back on my snowmobile and starting it. He did the same. "What kind of freaked-out tweaker would be walking around here without clothes on?" Ace asked in his deep baritone. "Man, I need a hit of whatever that guy's on. I've got 2 sweaters and 2 winter jackets on, and I'm still cold. Hey, Kelton, hey, what do you say?" He started elbowing me jokingly. I frowned, not responding. Ace always had a smart aleck remark. He was next to me when I was interviewed for this job originally down at the recruitment center in Washington State. The old lady doing the interviewing was a bloodless, angry-looking specimen of a woman with huge glasses that magnified her eyes twice over. She spat out each of the questions like a drill sergeant talking to fresh meat in the army. "Are you a member of any organized religion?" she had asked brusquely. Ace shook his head. "No, ma'am, but I am a member of a disorganized religion," he said. "We call ourselves the servants of the old ones. We're waiting for the ancient reptilian gods at the bottom of the ocean to awaken. So far, however, they haven't responded to any of our texts." I thought about this as I revved the engine twice, a sign that I was about to pull off and that he should stay close. We took off, going slow and following the tracks as close as possible without destroying them. But the tracks just kept going, the bloodstains seeming to grow fainter as we moved forward. And strangely enough, the distance between the hand and footprints also started to get longer. as if someone were running on all fours and speeding up. We were nearing the beginning of the forest of evergreens when I saw a white flash just up ahead. The thing that ran from us was humanoid, but I knew at once that it was no person. It ran on hands and feet, totally naked, its skin a pale, lifeless white color. It turned its head towards the lights of the snowmobiles, briefly. I saw a hairless creature with skin that clung tightly to its simian body, its lips permanently pulled back from its mouth as if they were eaten away. Underneath it showed mottled black and red gums covered in thick, clotted blood. Its nose appeared as little more than 2 irregular holes, and its eyes. They reflected the light of the snowmobiles, like the eyes of a raccoon or a possum. They were huge and sunken in its starving, monstrous face. And I saw what was leaving the bloody trails. The creature was, as far as I could tell, totally uninjured. In its permanently grinning mouth, between rows of crooked, sharp, blood-stained teeth, it held a body. It had deep puncture marks in its tiny parka, half rings of teeth marks that must have broken its ribs. The bloodstains on the snow were becoming fainter, because the heart was no longer pumping in the body of the one leaving them. I had a loaded rifle inside my snowmobile and kept a 12-gauge shotgun slung around my back, mostly in case of bear or moose attack. I always kept the shotgun loaded with slugs, which were, in my experience, the most versatile ammunition for stopping any large animal. The .308 might take down a polar bear, at least with a good headshot, or it might just piss it off on a bad day. But a shotgun slug to the head or heart will stop any bear or moose in its tracks. Of course, this was no polar bear ahead of me. For all I knew, it was something far worse. I looked down at the speedometer to see I was going 20 miles an hour in the dark, in a blizzard. And yet this strange humanoid creature was still losing us. Its seemingly never-ending store of energy still sending it forward at a superhuman speed. Its pale, bony legs and arms pumped back and forth so fast that they were just a blur. It kept its sharp teeth around the nape of the dead infant's neck, like a mother cat carrying its young. I kept one hand on the steering wheel while trying to free the strap of my shotgun over my head. I slowed down below 20, and the creature responded by going even faster. It was making a break for the mountain forests that started only a few 100 feet away. I got the gun free and quickly stopped the snowmobile and raised it. I centered the sights, taking a deep breath to steady myself, and fired. I missed, though I don't know by how much. Shotguns had the drawback of being significantly less accurate at further distances than the rifle, but by the time I got the .308 out, I knew the creature would have long since disappeared in the thick brush and trees. By this point, Ace had also stopped and opened fire, but the creature had already gone. "God damn!" Ace screamed. "That was one fast son of a... I can't believe he got away after all that." I heaved a deep sigh. We found a radio in the snowmobile and messaged in what had happened, or at least the basic gist of it. I left out the part about naked, half-human abominations and said that it was an unknown animal. There wasn't much law enforcement up in these parts because, hell, there were barely any people. The rangers, as well as fish and wildlife agents, regularly worked with the police officers in small towns, at least those that had police officers. Dozens of the local tribal villages had no police at all. These people would come to forest rangers and fish and wildlife agents most of all, and were always some of the county's friendliest and most helpful residents. By the time we got back to the original blood-stained footprints, the snow had covered up the tracks completely. However, based on the direction that the creature had been going, and where the tracks had come from, I thought I knew where it might have started. Following the path in a nearly straight line led to the Lutna Peak Trailer Park. Ace and I drove off at max speed across the rolling hills and flat plains, the snow coming faster and heavier now. They say Eskimos have dozens of words for snow, and after being a ranger up here, I can say I've seen every variation of it 1,000 times. This was turning into the kind that was wet with huge flakes and tended to stick to everything. We would probably have to find refuge soon, especially if it got any heavier. I heard the screaming before I saw the commotion. As we came around the sharp right turn where the dirt road turned into the trailer park, I saw dozens of people out, flitting like gnats around one of the trailers at the back corner of the park. All of the lights were on in that particular trailer, and I saw one woman comforting another who was bent over and crying. Even though almost everyone knew us here, I pulled out my badge identifying me as a federal law enforcement officer. Up here, all the rangers were technically federal agents, allowed to carry guns and make arrests like typical police, except we were licensed under the Department of the Interior rather than under state law enforcement agencies. I ran into the trailer, and after one long glance around the place, I knew there was no need to call for any ambulances. Ace followed close behind me, his heavy, thudding footsteps shaking the trailer slightly as he ascended the steps. We said nothing for a long moment. The entire family was dead. They were everywhere, even spotting the ceilings. Most of what remained had frozen in the cold, and I wondered how long the door had been left open. Parts were scattered across the floor, an arm in the corner of the room, a head standing up on the kitchen counter, even a random tooth embedded into the sheetrock. The savagery was brutal, and the amount of strength required to carry out such an attack must have been extraordinary. I think we're going to need a lot more people on this than just me and you, Ace said. I nodded, already bone-tired, and with so much more work to do tonight before I could go to sleep. We phoned both state and federal authorities in the area. Since much of the land was tribally owned, we had to deal with multiple branches. Eventually, we got CSI out there in the middle of a snowstorm, though they had to come from over 3 hours away. We just secured the scene while we waited, constantly being brought into neighboring trailers where townsfolk would tell us the latest gossip. They also brought us hot coffee and tried to milk us for any information we might have, as they usually did in such situations. "No, Maggie, honest," Ace was saying to one old lady wrapped up in an ancient fur coat. "I don't know any more about it than you do. You can be sure that you'd know if I did." By that point, police cars were slowly pulling in, one by one. Ace and I told them a simplified version of the night's events, said goodnight, and left the scene to them. I went home and took a scalding hot shower, trying to force the night's coldness out of my bones. Then I slept deeply, though I had nightmares of that creature's face turning to me, holding a dead baby in its mouth and marking me with its emotionless, reflective eyes. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I would sleep in a bed for many days. The police officer who would be tagging us, a woman named Officer Melinda Jansen, had the look of someone who just started a new job and doesn't realize how terrible it is yet. She was all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and when she shook my hand, she nearly crushed the bones together under her iron grip. I saw Ace wince slightly when he shook her hand, too. When she turned her back, he looked at me with one eyebrow raised, as if he were saying, "What can you do?" It didn't take us long to find the spot from the previous night. When we got close to the forest where the creature disappeared, I saw a branch that had been hit by a shotgun blast and knew we were right on the money. In the daytime, I saw that there was a slight curving trail through the trees here, maybe an old deer trail. It was just wide enough for us to take our snowmobiles through if we went slow. Occasionally, I would have to get off, being in the lead, and move large branches that lay across the path, but overall, it was faster going than I had expected. The trail followed across the top of a rolling hill, went down, and then spiraled up around a mountain. We were high now, at least 7,000 feet above sea level, and the view went for hundreds of miles. It was breathtaking, seeing the frozen white landscape below us, mountains lining one horizon and the Arctic Ocean on another. A couple 100 feet ahead of us, however, the trail just stopped. I saw an opening in the mountain, slowly bringing my snowmobile up, I looked into it and saw what looked like naturally formed stone hallways. The hall sloped down at a steep angle without stairs. An eerie silence radiated from the gradually thickening darkness. The other two snowmobiles cut out right behind mine, and Officer Jensen came walking up, flicking on her LED headlamp. Immediately, I saw a strip of light blue cloth. I walked forward, bending down to confirm what I had already suspected, that this was a piece of the missing infant's clothing. That looks like more than enough cause to me. Let's do this, Jensen said. I'd like to be back before sundown. She kept walking without waiting for confirmation. Ace and I slung on our packs and turned on our headlamps. I tried using the radios and sat, phoned to share our location, but neither was working. The bright, artificial lights showed that the natural stone walls of the hall just kept on descending into the mountain. A warm breeze blew past me, an acrid sulfuric smell following in its wake. This is just a body recovery mission at this point, I whispered to Ace, giving Officer Jensen a wide space so I could talk. So why are we potentially risking our lives here? We should be waiting for backup. We both know that the infant is dead and has been for a while. You know what I think. Ace whispered conspiratorially before a low shriek stopped us all in our tracks and ended conversation. I never did get to hear what he thought. By this point, it was much warmer than it had been outside, and I had the urge to start stripping off jackets. The shrieking had intensified and was now being answered by dozens of others that surrounded further away in the stone halls. Officer Jensen had pulled out her gun, which I saw with some astonishment was a .454 Ruger, a large caliber gun with good stopping power. I saw enough magazines strapped around her hips to decimate an entire herd of buffalo. I also pulled off my shotgun, making sure it was filled with lead slugs. Do you have any idea what we're up against? I asked her. Ace was right behind us, his shotgun already cocked and loaded, the muzzle pointed downwards. I was sweating heavily by this point. The air in the tunnel just kept getting warmer. It felt like I was walking into a sauna. Thin clouds of mist and droplets of hot condensation clung to the smooth granite ceilings. The hall continued to descend at the same steep rate, but now I could see something at the bottom. Light. Not much more than you, really, Officer Jensen said with a slight sneer. My only advice is to shoot first and ask questions later. Kill anything that moves. This place has taken a lot of people already. People who were too fat and slow to watch their own backs. I squinted as I examined the lights. They seemed to emanate from some sort of organism growing on the stone's surface. It wasn't electrical lights, and it certainly wasn't natural sunlight. It glowed like the lights of millions of fireflies, a purplish blue color that painted the granite floors and walls in a totally different light. We were walking as quietly as possible by this point, but I still hadn't seen anyone. We reached the bottom of the stone halls, where strange mushrooms glowed in the darkness, their mycelium giving off that black light color everywhere as it stretched across the threshold of the opening. I turned off my LED, seeing my comrades do the same, then poked my head through, looking back and forth. I saw more of those creatures from before, their lips missing, their skin pale, their eyes huge and rabid. They constantly twisted and snapped their heads to the left or right as if hearing something only they could perceive. Two were dragging an elk that had been butchered. Another was dragging an old man forward by the upraised legs. I saw his head was missing, his wrinkled hands trailing behind the body. I watched where all this activity was headed. Then I gasped. A huge insectile monster sat lazily against the stone wall as these creatures brought it meat. The monster was so fat that I wasn't even sure it could stand up. It had a blood-red, chitinous exterior, with a hood like a cobra's that extended around its head. Its teeth trembled together constantly as it shoved more offerings into its mouth, sending them gushing forwards in thick clotted rivulets that dripped down its chin. Its long, thin arms had sharp, knife-like digits, and its 6 legs branched like those of a praying mantis, splayed out on each side of its body, shining a dark red color in the strange light of the chamber. Its belly stretched far in front of its body, and with horror I saw it drop a cluster of eggs, each as big as a dog. Their surfaces writhed and trembled, looking tight and ready to burst at any moment. The creatures that fed and cared for this monster rushed over, dragging the eggs to the corner of the warm chamber. I saw that there were dozens more of them over there, and that some had already hatched. Whatever that monster was, it had already given birth, and now those things were walking around totally free to kill anything or anyone they wanted.